Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Suidlanders Chat with me, Marius Greyling, and Simon Roche, where we will discuss a couple of interesting facts and things that's happened over the course of the weekend up until today. Simon, how are you today?
Yeah, I'm well, thanks. And yourself, Marius?
I'm very good. Off air, you told me we're going to discuss the foreign central banks hold more gold than the treasuries, and I told you I'm glad you're going to do this video because I don't know the significance of it, and I think a lot of the viewers also might not catch the significance of this graph. We will ask Arnold to put in a graph there that you've sent over WhatsApp to me.
Yeah, yeah, it's a very big thing, Marius, and sadly, most people fail to understand it. When I say sadly, I don't blame people for not being economics and finance experts. It's just a great pity because the ramifications of this are going to be very great further down the line, and it would be best if people were cognizant of it and endeavoring to insulate themselves just a little bit from it. So the long and the short of it is that, in fact, let me just mention this before I go on. Yesterday, I held a 1 hour, 18-minute conversation with one of the world's top geologists. He possesses two qualifications in the market, so licenses to sign off, let's say, propositions for the opening of mines. For instance, two qualifications that are only held by about four people, two different groups of four in the world. This man is unquestionably one of the great legends of geology. And in the course of the conversation, he said, I feel so strongly about this stuff that I have just stopped talking about it to some of my friends because they just can't see it. And he said, I feel the need to be forceful. So I should rather not talk about it than get all worked up and try to drum it into people's brains. But this is very, very, very serious. What the graph shows is the relationship, the proportions of treasuries holdings and gold in central banks. So a treasury is a bond. It's another word for a bond. What a bond is when a government is trying to raise money, they auction debt. I'm sure that many of your viewers will recognize that term, a bond auction. How it works is that they propose to the market to lend them money, to give them money. I give you a piece of paper, you give me money for that paper, I use that money to build a road. I give you back a repayment on interest repayment, and then at the end I give you your capital, and it's for a set period of time. So they go to the market, they say, we want to issue $1 billion worth of 30-year bonds with a coupon, an interest rate of 5%, let's say. They feel the market, and the market goes for it, doesn't go for it. They only raise 500 million, not a billion, or they are obliged to improve the interest rate in order to gain further interest in the market. So it's like an auction. Those treasuries that are auctioned are to some extent bought up by other governments. Governments, banks, ordinary human beings are supposed to have a tremendous sense of confidence in governments generally. Maybe not the government of Sudan or Somalia or wherever. But when it comes to the USA, China, Russia, the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Australia, the big players
Mm.
that have been largely stable for hundreds of years or many decades anyway. China, as a modern communist state, was only founded in 1948, but it's big, it's stable. We can trust the Chinese not to be going anywhere soon. Therefore, there is no risk to me, or very little risk to me, in investing in bonds. I'm going to buy $1,000 worth of Chinese bonds, and I will only get a small interest return, and I'll get my money back after a long, long time. But I know that it's very safe.
Mm.
In 1971, the USA discovered that it didn't have enough money to pay for the Vietnam War. It had run out of money. The Vietnam War had become a fantastically expensive undertaking. And it happened quite soon. The politicians didn't listen to the warning signs. And at the middle of 1971, on a Friday afternoon, this crisis came to a head. And rapid decisions were taken to abandon the gold standard. The US dollar had always been backed by gold. But if they were going to print, let's say, $100 billion of money through issuing debt, whatever, we know that these things are very, very murky. So I'm going to speak in layman's terms. They wouldn't have enough gold to cover it. Somebody would sooner or later say, hang on, there are $1 trillion in circulation, but we don't have $1 trillion worth of gold. The dollar is no longer backed by gold. Somebody's pulling a fast one here. It's those blooming politicians. We'll vote them out. So what they did was go off the gold standard. They said the US dollar will no longer be backed by gold. And that then gave them free rein to print a whole lot of money that they couldn't back by gold to continue with the Vietnam War, to cover their shortfalls. That meant effectively that all of the world went off the gold standard, because in 1944, the Americans conned, perhaps I shouldn't say conned, because the people that they were dealing with were adults. They were experienced politicians. They were the best economists in the world, that met at the Mount Washington Hotel in New Hampshire, United States of America. The village is called Bretton Woods. So it's known, what came out of it is known as the Bretton Woods Agreement. Mount Washington Hotel, village of Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, USA, northeastern USA. And there they all agreed. It was the 49 allied countries, 44 and some others. 49 countries agreed, everybody except the Soviet Union. Soviet Union said, I can't remember what the expression was, but it was something like, you will make the whole world, or you will make every country in the world an extension of Wall Street. Meaning you will make every country in the world an extension of your banking shenanigans.
Yeah.
So they didn't participate, but the rest of the world agreed, to cut a long story short, that only the USA would be backed by gold, the US dollar. And all of the other countries, South Africa, New Zealand, Australia, whatever countries had previously been backed by gold, we're talking now the allies, and this set the tone for the world. Whatever currencies had previously been backed by gold would no longer be backed by gold. Only the USA would. Now, there was a reason. That was because during the course of the war, the USA participated in a program called Lend-Lease and others and others. To cut a long story short, all the good that the USA did in World War II at the cost of its young boys' blood was charged. It was put on a bill. And every time a bill was presented, oh, you need another 10 convoys across the Atlantic. Right, we will then take another ton of gold. And famously, a ship called oh dear me, I would forget the name. An American ship came to Cape Town during the war and took a whole lot of South African gold. I forget the amount, something like 10 tons, an enormous amount in money terms, and took it to the USA on behalf of Britain. So you're part of the Commonwealth, you're part of the Empire, you're part of the British war effort, cough up. And at the end of the war, these allied countries didn't have enough gold to back their currencies. So they said to the USA, well, look, we'll pay you. We'll pay. But give us the gold and then we'll pay you off. It's a good deal. Can't lose. The Americans said, no. We much prefer the yellow stuff. So we propose that you abandon the gold standard and we will peg your currency to ours and we'll be backed by gold. So just an absolute bull dust story, excuse my language. Absolute nonsense. They went off the gold standard in 1971 and started printing money like there was no tomorrow. With the result that there wasn't that much point in central banks all over the world holding gold. The USA has effectively made it not part of the global financial system. And before the USA, well, the Allied countries did exactly the same thing, except for the Soviet Union, because they could see the obvious risk. And that it was quite obviously a nonsense story, with the result that over time, central banks would sell off gold to raise cash. And when they needed to raise money through bonds, the central banks would buy them. So it went from, in 1980, all of the central banks around the world, except the USA, the foreign central banks, holding about 80% gold. 80% of what they had in the storeroom, in the safe, was gold. So 1971 comes, they go off the the gold standard, but it takes until about 1973. In the meantime, we have the OPEC oil crisis. The value of gold skyrockets, or the price of gold skyrockets, particularly because the US dollar is devaluing with all of the printing. So the amount of gold that you have in your holdings goes up in value. And everybody thinks, oh, well, this is working out quite well, isn't it? All the people who said this was rubbish, bad move, making no sense, they were wrong. They've just been proven wrong. Price of gold shot up. It's looking good. But that was artificial. It wasn't that they were buying gold. It's that there was a historical coincidence that made it look like it had been a great idea all along. And then it tapered off, until in 2015, the average holdings of central banks around the world, all together, except the USA, was about 10%. In the meantime, people bought US bonds and other countries' bonds, but this is largely to do with the US, in the process that I described earlier. So other central banks would buy US debt at US debt auctions. They would hold a piece of paper instead of a lump of gold that would say, this is a 30-year Treasury bond. You've bought $1,000 worth of bonds. You're going to get 2, 3, 4% a year. It's peanuts, but it'll be safe. And then after 30 years, we'll give you your money back. Now, many people would say, well, that's just absolutely a stupid idea anyway. Anybody who knows anything about inflation knows that in 30 years' time, the US dollar is going to be worth half what it was. And the interest that you're getting is so small, it can't compensate for inflation.
Yeah.
But the system worked. In the world of global finance, shadows and dust and deviousness and deceit, it worked. Everybody played along. In recent years, two things have happened again. Again, two things coming together at the same time to make something like a perfect storm. The one was that the USA began to use the dollar as an instrument to punish other countries through all sorts of sanctions, and the SWIFT story and access to, now with Russia, for instance, they've been cut off SWIFT, and we spoke about SWIFT last week, and alienated from the global credit card architecture. All of the credit cards in the world, I beg your pardon, rely on the architecture of Visa and MasterCard. So once you cut that, credit cards don't work anymore. Even though yours might say Standard Bank, it's not Standard Bank. It's Standard Bank as an agency. It's not their architecture at all. So you had the USA being spiteful concerning the use of the dollar. And that led to countries like China, which had traditionally bought enormous sums of US debt. I mean, just fantastical sums of US debt, thinking that maybe it's not a good idea to buy so much US debt, to be dependent upon the stability of a country that has been showing erratic behavior in recent decades, whose economy is not doing as well as they make out, and who may punish us with sanctions at any time in the future. Who knows what they may do, just as they've confiscated or frozen hundreds of billions of dollars of Russian assets in Europe in recent years. This is possibly not a wise idea. The other thing that happened simultaneous to the US being spiteful and countries then pulling back from their love for holding the dollar is that BRICS began to talk about holding commodities and having commodity-backed currencies in order to give them an advantage. If our currency is backed by gold or whatever, there's a good chance that people will have a good sense of confidence in our currency, rather than it being like the US dollar, backed by nothing. Absolutely nothing. That paper is paper. Nothing more than paper. There's not some secret trick behind the paper, something that the average layman viewer doesn't know. It's a bit complicated for me. I was great with languages at school, but maths and finance, I'm sure it's okay. No, it's not okay. There's nothing behind the paper currency that gives it substance. It's just, you hope. We're all trading paper. That's all we're doing is trading paper. I have some here. As if I walked into the stationer's shop and bought a whole lot of paper, and I started dishing it out, 10 Rand, 10 Rand, 10 Rand, 10 Rand, and people accepted it. There's no magic in it at all. With the result that in recent years, many central banks, notably the Chinese and the Indians and others, began to buy fewer US treasuries and more gold. There are two excellent videos on YouTube, both by a man called Dominic Frisby. Frisby with a Y, not a double E. Dominic Frisby, in which he does deep dive scholarly analysis of how much gold are the Chinese holding. All of the gold in existence is 200 and something thousand tons, 210, 215,000 tons. The Chinese hold at least 36,000 tons.
Oh, okay.
The Chinese hold close to a sixth. The Chinese government, by the way, just the government, not the people, not your gracious wife's jewelry. The Chinese government alone holds about 1/6 of all of the gold in existence in the world. And that shows you the extent to which they have taken this matter very seriously. Indians, as I've already said, similarly. Not in the same league. It's not a sixth or a seventh or an eighth or a ninth. It might be a 20th. Nevertheless, by the time you've added a sixth and a 20th and a half a percent here and a 12, it becomes disproportionate. And so it was that for the first time since 1996, so we said that there was this artificial inflation of the value of the gold being held in central banks between the time that America went off the gold standard. It looked like it was a great idea because the value of gold actually went up and to 1980. And then it went down, 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 down until in 1997, the value of gold, or the value of the gold holdings of all of the foreign banks in the world, was less than the value of their holdings of these pieces of paper that might be called promissory notes. All they are is a promise that you'll get your investment back, your bond payment back. It's just a promise. By 1998, gold wasn't featuring anymore, and it dropped to about 10%, as I said, in 2015. And since then, it's been climbing. And on the 27th of August, just a few days ago, today being the 2nd of September, the video typically is produced by Arnold overnight, and we release the video on a Thursday typically. So just a few days ago, gold overtook the value of the gold that is held by the world's central banks, partly as a result of the good performance of gold in recent months, partly as a result of the Chinese being reluctant to buy US bonds, and the Japanese in recent years famously also. The two have passed one another. Gold has become slightly more in a sudden leap. People will see on this graph how there's quite a sudden leap involved. There's quite a steep little tail to that curve, that graph. And that's the long and the short of it, Marius. And it's very big news because it corresponds with something. NASDAQ breaks all records. The NASDAQ's market capitalization relative to the US money supply has reached 176%. So that means that the capital value of the companies on the NASDAQ stock exchange. USA has 4 major stock exchanges. The smallest one is the Russell, the NASDAQ, the Dow Jones Industrial Average, and the S&P 500. The supposed value of the NASDAQ is 76% more than all of the money that exists in the USA, liquid money. The ratio is 45 points above the dot-com bubble peak in 2000. So those people who remember the dot-com bubble, it's this overvaluation is much greater than the overvaluation, the bubble that was popped and which in the year 2000. the market capitalization relative to the US GDP is 129%, which is almost double the dot-com era. Almost double. So when there was this disproportion in the year 2000, well, it's only half the disproportion now. This is not just an overextension. It is a signal that liquidity and valuations are completely out of sync. The last time we saw something close to this, it did not end quietly. So what I'm saying is that we are seeing seismic events in the fiscal and financial and economic aspects of geopolitics. You see people in the USA throwing money at the stock market out of all proportion to the actual value of the production of the economy. The economy is only producing, let's say, 27 trillion. But what did we read here? The market capitalization relative to the GDP is at 129%. So the economy produces 27 trillion, and just the companies on the stock exchange are valued at, say, 35 trillion, whatever 29% of 27 is. Now, these things are not always directly connected to one another. You shouldn't measure the valuation of a certain stock exchange. This is just one of four, by the way.
Yeah.
Whereas there's only one GDP. So between the Dow Jones and the Russell and the S&P 500, what are all of the stock exchanges saying? Are they saying that, well, we know the GDP is 27%, but golly gee, we believe in the American company, and we say that all the American companies across all four of the major stock exchanges, they're worth, $120 trillion. There's not really a connection between GDP and the value of the companies, because GDP is what's produced in 1 year. And it includes people who are not on the stock exchange. A one-man plumbing business, a one-man shoe repair business, a one-man grocery store. But what the experts are saying is that never before, or very seldom before, was anybody ever so stupid as to believe that the economy was worth so much relative to what it actually produces, relative to how much money. In other words, people are throwing money at the shares. They say, I want to buy a Tesla share for $1,000. Whereas the evidence suggests that Tesla is not really worth more than, say, $100 a share, whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
That's the gist of it. It's a very murky thing. It's more of an art than it is a science. It's not easy to understand. But my story is that just as we're seeing this tremendous shift, banks buying up as much gold as they can, my geologist friend, globally famous, nobody like him alive on earth today, his stature, saying to me, Simon, I've given up talking about it because people just don't see it. It's madness.
Yeah.
We are headed for a fantastic crisis. The Chinese buying up gold, abandoning US bonds, don't trust them anymore. The US having to offer fantastic rates of interest just to get people to take a bite. And we see that this madness is kind of extrapolating itself into the stock market, where people are desperately throwing enormous sums of money at companies that simply aren't worth it, Marius.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like this is another peg in the cog of the dollar that's going to collapse. I mean, this really sounds like another thing that's just going to weaken the dollar even more, and maybe because they've overstretched themselves, they are going to, like in the bubble in 2000, the bubble is going to pop and the dollar is going to fall. So, I mean, Gold, I've seen a couple of videos where very rich companies across the world are starting to buy more gold than they do anything else, or getting some of their money and placing it in gold. So, yeah, yeah. I'm not an economist, but I mean, there's a lot of talk of the dollar that's suffering and that might not make it very long.
Well, I think that we are seeing the death of the dollar. I have for a long time said to people, the dollar is not going to end overnight, 100% from 100 to 0. However, we are seeing something happen. And in years to come, it's going to be rough. To my surprise, it looks like it's happening more quickly than
Mm,
I expected. It's rough. It's not good. And sadly, everybody's favorite ginger-haired president is not making matters any better by forcing or bullying Jerome Powell to make rate cuts, interest rate cuts. When the Federal Reserve Bank reduces the interest rate that it charges for the money that it issues into the market, then banks say, hey, me, I want more. And they offer a reduced rate to the consumer. And the consumer says, oh, gee, money's so cheap. I think I'm going to get that house. The interest rate has dropped. I can afford it now. I think I'm going to get that new Ford F-250 XLT Super Rider truck. People spend more money and they get themselves into greater debt just at the very moment when you don't want to be taking risks in a shaky system. Now is not the time to be reckless. There's enough recklessness going on already. So I think we're going to see tears in, let's say, the next 6 months, Marius. I don't say the end of the dollar, but a lot of tears
yeah.
within the next 6 or so months.
Well, thanks, Simon, for explaining it to me. I'm definitely understanding it now a bit better than what I did a couple of days ago when you first posted the graph on the socials and on the WhatsApp channels. It makes more sense now about what is going on. And then, yeah, we will talk again on Thursday. Where we do the weekly events. I've spoken to you off air of Robert Fisko from Slovakia that told Putin they will keep Russian oil and gas. Doesn't matter what the UA or NATO says. We can maybe talk about that on Thursday a bit. I
We
like it.
must.
I like it. I saw the video and he said, bugger it. We want to deal with Russia. I don't care what the other people say. But anyway,
Uh,
Simon, I hope you have a great evening and then we'll chat on Thursday.
Super. Thank you, Marius.
Pleasure, pleasure. Cheers, Simon.
Yeah, bye bye.
Bye.